So the question is no more simply how we educate. The question is, are we raising thinkers or are we raising repeaters?
But this calls for a serious national attention. I've seen how education transformation, you get a young ones to aspire for greatness and child from South LA then ends up at Harvard University.
Joining us today on this special episode is Honorable Yaw Adutwum. He's an educator, an institutional builder, a member of parliament, and a former minister of education of Ghana.
The fact that I almost didn't go to high school when I was growing up and it was time for me to go, and my dad could not afford 40 cedis. I had to be paid as a deposit to secure my spot in a high school close to me. I needed 40 cedis and it was tough. 40 cedis at that time, probably about $10 or so, which was the beginning of great things to come.
One thing that is fascinating about your journey is that you started from the roots, so you understand the challenges that comes with people who don't have access to education as easy as those in the cities.
And today, when I look at the legacy statement I crafted, and when I look at the fact that has come to pass in my lifetime, during the time that I was the Minister for Education, it makes me know that everything is possible.
If not education, what career would you have pursued?
Probably will have pursued.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Scholars Table. My name is Dr. Banda Khalifa, your host. As we all know, education shapes the destiny of nations. In Ghana and across Africa, the classroom has long been a place of discipline, structure, and mastery. Students are taught to listen carefully, to respect authority, to reproduce what they have learned with precision. But the world has changed, or is changing. We are now living in an era where artificial intelligence can retrieve information instantly, where innovation determines economic survival, and where curiosity may matter more than compliance. So the question is no more simply how we educate. The question is, are we raising thinkers or are we raising repeaters? Joining us today on this special episode is Honorable Yaw Adutwum. He's an educator, an institutional builder, a member of parliament, and a former minister of education of Ghana. From founding schools in the United States to leading national reforms in Ghana, he has operated both inside the classroom and inside cabinet. And he has publicly called for a shift towards inquisitive, confident students who are unafraid to ask bold questions. That vision challenges us to rethink long-held assumptions about how we teach, assess, and prepare young people for the future. So can a system built on high-stakes examination evolve into one that rewards inquiry? Can Ghana lead in STEM without transforming classroom culture? And is our education system moving fast enough for the age of AI? This conversation wouldn't be centered on theory. It would be about the future of Ghana and Africa. Honorable Adutwum, thank you so much for joining us on the Scholars Table.
Thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on your platform.
Okay, Honorable, as initially stated, I'm a big fan of your work. You've been one of the education ministers who has done tremendously well in the STEM field, providing training to the young ones. The first time I saw you was during the pandemic, when you were literally teaching virtually because students couldn't go to class. So before we even begin, I want you to kind of take us through your journey a little bit. Tell us where you grew up, how you ended up in the US and what motivated you to come back to Ghana.
Thank you so much for such a wonderful opportunity. I always say I'm one of the luckiest education ministers at the time when I was education minister in the world. I've seen how education transformation, education reforms work in the United States. I was part of those who were championing education reforms through charter schools. So I got first-hand experience in how change schools in underserved communities, how you get a young ones to aspire for greatness and child from South LA then ends up at Harvard University and Stanford University and does so well. And so I have spent my life there. And with that kind of experience, I taught for 10 years. I became charter school leader for 12 years. That was quite a good experience with a master's in education management credential, which allowed me to teach mathematics and computer science. And then from there on, moving on to do a PhD in education policy and administration, focusing especially on international education. So one would say that my background had prepared me very well to come back to Ghana. But when you are enjoying the American dream in California, and you've seen it all. You have 200 workers that you pay every month. You are running a multi-million-dollar operation, 3 charter schools. You are the boss. And then somebody come across and tell you, I want you to come back to Ghana. Come back to Ghana. I reflected when I first met the former president of Ghana, Nana Addo Akufo-Addo. He was not a president then. He had come to visit California to talk to Ghanaians, share his vision of Ghana with us, and came to one of my schools. We hosted him in one of my schools' auditorium, and he couldn't believe that a Ghanaian was building schools in America. He couldn't believe that I was the boss and I was in charge. And he asked me a very simple question. He said, would you consider coming back to Ghana to help me change the education system? And I said to myself, here is one of those politicians. What is he going to do to change the Ghanaian education system? But somehow there was some sincerity in his voice. We continued the conversation, and he shared with me how he wants to bring about free secondary education, that every child in Ghana will go to high school. And it touched me. I saw sincerity in his communication with me. And I said to myself, wow, this is interesting. This guy means well for the future of Ghana. And then reminded me of the fact that I almost didn't go to high school when I was growing up, and it was time for me to go. And my dad could not afford 40 cedis to be paid as a deposit to secure my spot in a high school close to me. I was not about going to boarding to buy all the things I needed, just staying at home and going to school. I needed 40 cedis, and it was tough. My dad at the time was a cocoa farmer in the western region. We were migrants from Ashanti to the western region in a village called Antubam, Manswa Memfi area. And he took me along to his other villages, talking to his colleague farmers if anybody can lend him 40 cedis. Couldn't get any. 40 cedis at that time, probably about $10 or so, maybe a little bit higher. I've forgotten the exchange rate. He did everything. It was not going to be. And my younger brother got an idea that saved me when, in the evening, sitting in the cottage, he came up with the idea of allowing me to sell one of the pigs that had been given to him as he supported my uncles on their piggery, and said, hey, why don't you tell Dad to give you money to travel back to Ashanti region and sell the pig? Maybe you get the money. That was my saving grace. We went, sold it. I got 42 cedis, enough to pay the deposit, and then come back with the 2 cedis. And then they gave me a prospect. I had a few items to buy. It was tough, but eventually we were able to overcome that. Long story short, go to a secondary school, the first in the family, excited to be there, move on to sixth form, and then to university. Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, where I studied land economy. And interestingly, my brother who sold a pig for me to go to high school, when it was his turn to go, he didn't have a pig to sell, and there was still no money for him to go. So it was a tough one. And he decided to go and engage in rattan and bamboo chairs making, and he had a shop by the roadside where he did that. And I remember when I was at the university, I would go there and work with him after lectures, just to support him with my free labor. And one day I went there, he asked me a very simple question: that, can you help me go to school in Germany? You know, your friends come here and they say all the time that they are traveling to Germany. Can you help me go there too to study? And I knew that he couldn't go to the university, but he could go to a language school in Germany. I applied for him to go, but it was tough. He needed somebody with a foreign bank statement to sponsor him. And in my whole clan, nobody had even a local Ghanaian bank statement, much less a foreign bank statement. So it was a tough one. And one day I was just sharing his story with a friend. We just had about 3 weeks, and his admission will lapse. So I was sharing his story with a friend and said, we are looking for a foreign bank statement, somebody with the resources to sponsor him. We can't find any. And then somebody who passes by ran back towards us and say, hey, what are you looking for? And I said, I'm looking for a foreign bank statement. And the guy goes, I'll talk to my uncle in Australia. We should be able to help you out. And long story short, the uncle helped us, and my brother found himself in Germany. Did so well. When I graduated from the university, things were difficult in Ghana at the time. And one day he had a conversation with me. He said, hey, if you can get a chance to go to school, I'll be able to sponsor you. Long story short, he sponsored me, and I went to California, Los Angeles. And very interesting story how I began. And like most immigrants, you have to, once you
Yeah.
go to school, you have to do all sorts of jobs. You have to was a security guard for a few, about 2.5 years. And then after school, I got a chance to teach in the Los Angeles Unified School District, which was the beginning of great things to come.
Yes.
So
Yes.
it was from there that I got a chance then to apply for a federal government grant to develop, to build a charter school in Los Angeles. And we began an adventure that was to take me eventually back to Ghana.
Yeah. And I think one thing that is fascinating about your journey is that you started from the roots. So you understand the challenges that comes with people who don't have access to education as easy as those in the cities.
Mm,
So you are able
yeah.
to put a very good perspective on the problems that we are dealing with. And I think that is how come perhaps you were passionate about the free senior high school policy. I want us to look at, your experience both in the US and in the Ghanaian system. What personal convictions do you think shaped your approach to leadership when you came back to Ghana?
I think from my experience in the US and back to Ghana, one thing is empathy. When you can feel for people, when you begin to confront poverty face to face and overcome poverty in your life, and you see others in similar situations, you really can't stand it. You want to do everything possible for them to prosper. So I always say that I spent all my life fighting poverty. As a young man, life was difficult and challenging, and then find myself in the greatest nation on earth, United States of America, and in the urban areas where you have the disadvantaged youth, and I have to fight on their side to help them overcome poverty. So I think leadership with empathy as your foundation is what compels you to do what others think is not possible. So whether it's in America, when I set up my schools, I was looking at how do I get urban students to be able to go to Harvard and go to Yale and go to Stanford. So I had to create a curriculum that allowed them to do just that. I created an instructional program that allowed my students to learn at the highest level possible, asking urban students at the time to complete physics and biology and calculus and all those before they graduate from high school was a tall order. But in order for me to do that, I allowed them to do that. It meant I had to create an education system that required them to have all those courses under their belt before they can get a high school diploma. So it wasn't so much about preparing from the university. I said, hey, before you get a high school diploma, you need to complete all these courses. That was not the norm at all in schools across the US. And in Los Angeles, an average urban student, inner city child, did not have to do physics and chemistry. All that they needed probably was biology or life science, and that was it. But I knew that when they do that, they don't have the opportunity to go to top universities. So I created a system where college prep was a foundation for earning a high school diploma. And once I'm able to do that, then after high school, they could go to any university of their choice. And I have students going to so many top universities across the US because my instructional program allowed them to. And when they come to me in junior high school, my school was junior high and high school combined. When they came to me in junior high school, what did I have to do for them to be ready? For them to be ready for quality high school learning environment, I had to create an environment where students were going to school from 8 to 3:45, junior high school students. So we have extra period a day that focus on intervention. So what does that mean? It means that by the time the 3 years of junior high school was over, they had done close to about 3.5 years. We had Saturday school. Every other Saturday they were in school. So the additional instructional time made it possible for them to make up for the instructional loss that they may have experienced in their elementary schools. So once they are with me for 3 years, they get to high school and they are ready. And we have career pathways. We have those who go to high school and they will do law, others will do engineering, information technology, medical sciences. So we're preparing them for all these career pathways. And with a strong foundation in the sciences, we're ready to send them to any university they could dream of. So I come back to Ghana. I was able to look at the gaps in the education system, and I said to myself, we are in the fourth industrial revolution. How can we raise the next generation of Ghanaians who are able to overcome poverty without science, technology, engineering, and mathematics education? So after 4 years of being a deputy minister, I became a minister, and that was what I focused on. I wanted to make sure we have junior high schools that focus on STEM. We have high schools that focus on STEM. And we're able to do so much within a short period of time, especially with all this COVID thing that I had to confront as a minister for education. My sense of urgency was that we had to leave a legacy. And I remember attending the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Ministers of Education workshop, where I was crafting my legacy statement. And I put it in there and said, I, Yaw Adutwum, will be remembered by STEM. And today, when I look at the legacy statement I crafted, and when I look at the fact that has come to pass in my lifetime, during the time that I was the Minister for Education, it makes me know that everything is possible. So far as you are determined and you have the empathy to do so, you'll be able to do it. Why did I do that? I come to a country called Ghana, almost 60 something plus years of independence. And you have poverty. Ghana was a nation that had great hopes and aspirations at the time of independence. During the early 1960s, we were really rivaling other countries around the world. In fact, our economy was better than some of these Asian tigers that bypassed us and have become developed. Singapore and South Korea. Remember South Korea, our GDP per capita was higher than South Korea. What happened? What went wrong? What is it that they did right that we didn't do? And if you want to look at the role of education in national transformation, economic transformation, then you look at Ghana versus South Korea and all these countries, then it tells you something went wrong. We emphasize rote memorization in our schools. We de-emphasize, to a large extent, STEM education and critical thinking, collaboration, communication, and creativity and critical thinking, what is called the 4Cs, not emphasized in our school systems. Students are expected to memorize. Now, I remember speaking at the United Nations, I spoke to the fact that, to paraphrase my own quote, that we cannot memorize our way out of poverty, but we can critically think and innovate out of poverty. And I said that it did not only apply to Ghana, but to other African countries. And I called for an assertive curriculum, a curriculum that challenges the African child to think critically and ask questions, even within the context of what we call respect for adults. Within the African context, I expected my students to be able to challenge the status quo in a respectful way and say, sir, to a teacher, I like how you're explaining this to me, but I believe we can do it in another way. And why don't we try the way I think this can be done? So I believe that if we create an assertive environment for the African child, that is when you're going to create the students or the leaders of the future who can change the course of Africa. We have to begin to get rid of rote memorization. I remember being the Minister for Education. We had championed a reform of our curriculum, but we have an assessment organization, the West African Education Council. They are the ones who do external assessment to test our students. And I was shocked when I asked them to come and show me a sample exams that they were going to administer to all Ghanaian junior high school students across the country. And I asked them to show me the level of difficulty of the questions. In fact, in my office, there was this large screen there, and I popped up the Bloom's taxonomy. The new Bloom's taxonomy came on the screen. And I asked them, how many of the questions are the lowest level of the new Bloom's taxonomy, which is the remembering?
Yes.
And my brother, when you look at the remembering, out of the 40 questions, 20 of them were at remembering, which means you can memorize and pass. 20. Then the next level, understanding, had 10 questions. So between understanding and remembering, you have 30 out of 40. You almost have your A, and you don't have to even know how to apply. So we went up, and then the next thing was application, 10 questions. So all the 40 questions were at the first three levels of the new Bloom's taxonomy: analysis, evaluation, synthesis, and creating, were not on the exams. And this is where I told the head of WIC at the time, I said, madam, this is a clear case of where the tail is wagging the dog. We as a country say we want our students to be creative and critical thinkers, but the exams you are giving to these children have nothing to do with that. So I had to ask her to go back and change the questions and bring me another sample. And by the time she brought at least, I had questions that could challenge Ghanaian students to think critically. And the interesting thing is, I traveled to Nigeria and I met the Ghanaian High Commissioner to Nigeria. And then he said, hey, Minister, what's going on this year? My wife is a teacher in Ghana and she's telling me the questions has changed. And the questions that the students are answering are like the questions that our children who were in India were answering on the Indian exams. What happened? That is when I got the affirmation that we're doing something right in Ghana. That somebody who didn't even know the reforms has attested to it that the questions was just like what they were answering in India.
India.
My brother,
Yeah.
the bottom line is that we have to create the next generation of Ghanaians who can change the course of history of our nation. And to do that, there's no better place than education. You transform education to transform the economy. Otherwise, you are stuck. And there are too many things to share, but
I
you
know.
can't talk about, you want to create patriotic Ghanaians, but you are not teaching them history.
Yeah.
I was shocked that Ghanaian students were not learning history. World history, no. In high school, no world history, no Ghanaian history. It was shocking. And I'm happy
Yeah.
that by the end of my tenure as Minister for Education, we had refined and reformed the history curriculum and the social studies curriculum in such a way that history was part and parcel of what students had to do in social studies.
And I think one of the areas I wanted to explore was really your experience as a Minister of Education. I mean, you've highlighted some of the things that you were able to do, but how will you describe your overall experience as a Minister of Education, given that national responsibility? And I know Ghanaians also, most of the time, we expect so much from our ministers. How was your overall experience like? And what surprised you most about leading the education sector in Ghana?
I think I'll take the second part. What surprises me most? What surprises me most and surprised me then and surprised me now is meeting an ordinary Ghanaian on the street and the person coming close to you and say, thank you for your service to Ghana. That is what I never expected coming back from the US to Ghana to be in the political space. I have been told that politics was a thankless job, that people will insult you. Yes, I got a few of the insult. But what surprised me most then and now is how appreciative Ghanaians were of my work at the ministry. And that to me was interesting. It told me something that if you do the right thing, our people will look at you and they even single you out and
Yeah.
praise you
Yeah.
uh, for the work that you've done. I remember coming to the space and seeing the gaps in the education system and saying to myself, how do we do this? How do we bridge this gap? So I have an advisory board. I brought together some advisors from the universities, from industry, and said to them, we have to change. We have to change a few things here. And I believe that by then, STEM was something that people had heard of it, but didn't believe we could do it even better than the US in terms of the equipment and tools and getting students to go on international competitions and winning against the world. And then going to schools where you could see excitement in the face of the children as they pursued courses in STEM by medical sciences, engineering, are being taught in high schools. One of the schools that we created at the time was in my constituency called Bosomtri Girls. It was all girls senior high school focused on STEM. And when I went there to visit, when I was the minister, you could see excitement in the faces of the students. Their first graduating class 2 years ago, a number of them went on to become engineering students. 3 of them went to medical school. And this year, just this year, in their 5th year, they have won a national robotics competition against schools like Presec and other top level high schools. And in fact, Bosomtri Girls is representing Ghana in May at Michigan. So you
Wow.
can see that once you have a focus, and you are looking at impact, and you are working with students and working with them in a very unique way. So, for example, all the new schools that we opened, I affiliated them with existing high performing schools. I was also got funding from MasterCard Foundation to hire former headmistresses and headmasters who are done well to go and mentor the new schools, because we have
Mhm.
high performing schools that have been in existence for almost 180 years, like Wesley Girls. The school has a culture for academic performance second to none. And I said to myself, what can I borrow from Wesley Girls? And how can I bring American way of doing things? Combine that, put it in a new school, and it's a STEM school for girls, and let's see what will happen. And lo and behold, within 5 years, we're seeing the results. The girls are performing, and now they are going global. And I'm hoping that when they get to Michigan, they'll show America that Ghanaian girls can really compete and they can perform.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think that's an interesting anecdote. And it almost always comes down to mentorship and providing resources to students. And I know you've been, as you rightly said, you've been associated with STEM as a national strategy. So I want us to talk a little bit about you championing STEM education. So, why do you believe STEM is central to Ghana and I would say the broader African continent long term development? Why is STEM key? And what are the gaps that you've identified during your time as Minister of Education?
I think we don't have to go far, but look at late 1970s. What happened with the visit of Deng Xiaoping, the then president of China, to Japan. He visited Japan, saw Japanese transformation. He couldn't believe that Japan was way ahead of them. And then Xiaoping came back to China and said, I have to change my country. One of the few things, the early steps, one of the things that he did was to look at the curriculum. They saw that Chinese math teachers were not doing well, mathematics teachers were not doing well. So he sent teachers to UK, to US, to Japan to learn how to teach mathematics, building steps. He was beginning. Then they set a goal to produce engineers. But before they could do that, they also realized that the science curriculum content was limited. So they improved that from junior high school on, teaching physics and chemistry and biology. And then from there, they set a goal to create 50,000 engineers a year, produce 50,000 engineers a year. Why was he doing that? He knew in order to attract the Western companies to come to China and produce there, he needs to give them the critical manpower needed for those industries to become attracted to China. So they set a goal for 50,000 engineers, set up new engineering universities, form affiliation with some Western universities, and they made a goal of 50,000 engineers. Subsequently, other Chinese presidents continued with 200,000 engineers a year. They made a goal and then moved on to 800,000 to a million engineers. Now, China is producing more engineers than any nation on earth. Now, look at all the great things that is happening in China. China's transformation within a space of about 50 years is something that is unmatched in the world. I always say China has engineered its way out of poverty. China has done the impossible. Now they are leading in the field of IT, doing so many things that amazes America and other nations. So if you look at the Chinese example, nobody had to convince you that you need to focus on STEM education. You
Mm-hmm,
have to begin, build the foundation, and then begin to look from there. Singapore does similar things. Parallel to their industrialization agenda, they also focus on STEM education, and there's so much. So if you look at this century that we are in, no country has transformed its fortune without a strong foundation in education.
mm-hmm,
So when I came back to Ghana and with the support of the president, my focus was very simple. When I was a deputy minister and then beyond I became deputy minister, I knew that STEM education was what was going to make Ghana the country that we wanted to be. That blaster of Africa can shine brighter through STEM. So I had no doubt in my mind that if we don't begin, we are not going to be where our nation ought to be. And I was fortunate that with support from the World Bank, other organizations, we're able to build STEM schools for our own national resources. We're able
mm-hmm,
to operationalize some STEM schools. We come to Accra, we have Accra STEM Academy, a public school like none other in the whole Ghana and maybe most parts of Africa. You're not going to see a public school like that. But it's a public school in Accra, focused on STEM. So at the end of the day, I did not just start talking about STEM, I felt strongly that the government has to find the resources to build the infrastructure to support STEM.
Yeah.
And that is where we began. And that is how we're able to lay down foundation. The buildings can support STEM education. You put in the equipment. MasterCard Foundation provided funding that enabled us to build STEM lab in the new schools that we had opened. Then we also allowed existing high schools to offer engineering courses, robotics, and biomedical sciences, and other STEM related courses. So, what we envisaged to do was that within a short period, within 5 to 10 years, you can see STEM everywhere from kindergarten all the way up to the universities. We got funding from South Korea, and now we have one engineering university that is set to open in September of this year. So at the end of the day, we were looking at STEM as the most critical pathway to socio-economic transformation. Consequently, the sense of urgency was on, and the president allowed me to do so many things provided through the means of finance, whatever resources that we need, so that we can truly create something that other nations will come to learn. And I was happy that when Mo Ibrahim Foundation did assessment and evaluation of African education systems, Ghana then becomes number 2 in Africa, and next only to Tunisia in terms of quality
Yeah.
education, because you cannot come to our STEM schools and not appreciate the fact that this African country is doing what people thought was impossible. So, my brother, the bottom line for me was that if you want to do STEM, it's the sense of urgency for socioeconomic transformation that will drive you, that will make you want to do STEM and do it well. If that sense of urgency is not there, it becomes one of those things that you do to please the people and make them think something is going on. But I don't think our predicament can be overcome without a robust education system with a strong foundation in STEM. I believe that our nation, Ghana, and other African countries can really get rid of poverty through education. Education that creates opportunity that enable us to do what India is doing, IT hubs, with opportunity to really service even countries and companies outside the US, outside Ghana. The
Yeah.
Indian IT hubs where people are working for top companies around the world. I don't see why Ghana cannot do the same. We have the critical thinking young men and women. If we nurture them, we will get there. And that's why I was so happy that I was able to get the cabinet of Ghana to approve gifted and talented education. I was so happy the day the cabinet approved it. We did the policy, did everything. We're going to use some of the STEM schools for gifted and talented education schools across the country. Unfortunately, my government lost power. So
Yeah.
I don't get
Yeah.
to tell the Ghana policy in terms of education. So I passed by some of these schools and I say to myself, oh, I wish I was the minister. I wish I was a minister with a gifted and talented education.
Yeah.
In Ghana,
Yeah.
we don't have it. And I'm hoping that one day we'll have gifted and talented education.
And I think that is also one of our issues as a nation, the constant flux of ideas, the constant change in stability. We often keep changing people who are leading spaces that are, doing very well. So that is also one of the challenge. We don't have a national strategy on, say, education or health that consistently runs through.
We actually do. We have a
So
strategic plan for education, but I remember what my PhD advisor told me, Dr. William Rideout. He said he was an Africanist. He was really somebody working African policy. And during one of the first classes in his PhD program, he said in Africa, the road to hell is paved with policy. It's Africans write the best policy that they don't intend to implement. So even when you have, so that's why I interjected. That's not as if you don't have it. But
yeah,
how many
yes.
people even go and look at
It's a follow through. It's a follow through. That's
Yeah,
true.
yes,
Now,
yes,
that with the element of, I mean, we've spoken more about STEM. There's also an element of digitalization where
yes,
you were also front leading because the two almost always goes together. But in
yes.
Ghana, when you speak about digitalization, people often think it's about distributing laptops. How critical do you think digitalizing our educational system is to be able to implement the ideas or the innovations that we need as a nation?
I think when you come to digitalization, one of the things that you always have to ask yourself is this a means to an end or an end in itself? Some people think getting the tools in the hands of the children is such a wonderful thing. That means we're in the 21st century, fourth industrial revolution, and they will pick up some skills, in terms of the use of the equipment. That is fine. You may probably not even change the curriculum if that is what you want. So you just move the curriculum from books onto the computers, and the thinking, the learning is the same. They are still memorizing stuff from the computer. So you have not done much. It doesn't mean it's not attractive, it's not something people are excited about, and they are not picking up some skills. But when digitalization is a means to an end, a means to an end within the context of quality learning, relevant learning, because you have the tools now, you can do AI, the specifications allowing you to do so many things. That is when you are using technology to leapfrog. So we have to look within the context of leapfrogging, democratization of education. The children from rural communities can now learn the same content with quality teachers as children from urban areas. I remember when we created a portal where students can actually learn from the best teachers in the country. So what it meant was that we can get a teacher from the top performing high school, teach a class, and students in other remote areas where quality teachers were limited can have access to the same content. And that to me was how you bring about equity in the education space. So it's not just giving the laptops, it's what about the content that they are learning and how are you distributing content in an equitable fashion. And then how do you also ensure that you even reduce the cost of education? Because you see, when you look at the cost of using technology against textbook, you realize that over a period of time, you are saving a lot of money from the printing of test materials compared to when you are using equipment. So when you are saving funds, it means your limited education funds can go far. But you can't talk about digitalization without looking at the development of the content that will power the digital. So that is why I believe that if you don't have a strong STEM education, where students are doing coding, all those kind of things, you do digitalization, and you may still have a major problem of creating a digital divide. Divide where the content, first at the global level, you will become a consumer. So you may be having the same tools that students in California are having and they are studying with, but they are developing content, they are developing software, and you are consuming the content. You are using their apps instead of them using your app. And if people are using your app from Ghana, I always tell people, for example, if some of the digital tools, even WhatsApp, if a Ghanaian brought about WhatsApp, do you know how much money will be coming to Ghana?
Yeah.
It will be, maybe they will give us about a third of our tax revenue. But when we become consumers, our money is going north instead of money coming from north to south. And you can't talk about money coming from north to south, coming from developing countries to a place called Ghana, without putting your children in the maker spaces, in spaces where they become the developers of the content. So to me, one fascinating story is how you get the children to become the developers of the content. And when they become the developers of the content is being sold to countries in West Africa, to other places around the world, then you have money coming back into our country. And that is where digitalization really, really brings about great dividends for our country. So we shouldn't just be interested in the fact that we're using Google applications, we're doing this and
Yeah.
we're doing that, and you can move from this point to that. You can go from this house, and there are tools that are showing you where to go. If that tool was not devised, invented, developed, created by a Ghanaian, we may have a net loss. If I'm going to apply for a passport, I have to go online and I am uneducated, or I am somebody with little education and I have to go online instead of using my paper and pen to fill the form at no cost to me. I'm widening the digital divide with implications for the poor, because now the
Yeah.
poor has to pay for a passport to be filled out for them. So you can look at that and say, wow, now everything is online. Everything is online. But who developed the apps that you are using online? Everything is online. To what
Yeah.
extent are those who don't have high school or even university education going online to really take advantage of the digitalization that you're doing in your country? Now you go to markets like Makola, the famous Makola market in Ghana. And the women will tell you, oh, they are not buying things. They are not buying things. But what they don't realize is that people are buying things online. What stopped
Yes.
the Makola woman from being able to market also online? So if there was a space in Makola market where people can, with the support of high school graduates, with IT expertise, if government can pay them so that the Makola woman can put their products online, then they are not being cut out of the market as a result of digitalization. So
Yes.
digitalization can create an environment where the poor will be poorer if we don't take a serious look at it. So from schools to the community, digitalization is fascinating, but we need to really be able to say we are the developers of the content. And if we are the developer of the content, then we have a reverse in terms of software
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
revenues that are coming to us and not the other way around, where we are buying and it's costing us a little money is going to American companies. So I think it's great, but my focus was you can do digitalization without developing STEM education, developing the computer programmers and software developers who can then really create an environment where digitalization does not make us poorer, but rather it makes us richer.
Okay. And I think one other area that is now gaining a lot of momentum is in the area of artificial intelligence. And I
Yes.
know, like most, especially at the undergrad level, most programs now in the US have embraced the idea of artificial intelligence becoming the norm. Most schools, like in my school at Johns Hopkins, they've given access to these artificial intelligence tools to every single student. So my question is Ghana or Africa moving fast enough to embrace artificial intelligence? And should AI tools be embraced in our Ghanaian classroom, especially at the tertiary level? I haven't heard yet whether Legon or KNUST, has a policy on how students can use artificial intelligence. But do you think it's something that we have to start embracing?
Yeah, I think some universities have begun in their own small ways, but this calls for a serious national attention, something that requires that we give the university the resources to really make it the norm in terms of AI. People were hesitant in terms of AI and plagiarism issues and many other things that people were worried about, but we have to live with it. And therefore, what we need to do is to look at AI doing your routine tasks for you, making you more productive. But our competitive advantage will be which country is able to develop critical thinking young men and women who would then advance whatever they're doing with AI with critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you are talking about computer programmers, AI can do a lot of routine programming tasks. And I think it's going to even advance to do some complex programming tasks. So if you are looking at that as an area, you can see that AI will probably lead to loss of jobs in that sector. But when you
Yes.
come to content development, if you come to software development, which demands creativity, AIs are not at the point where they can immediately develop a software to solve a certain major problem. The human thinking is still very, very much needed in terms of how you can really do software and software content. So at the end of the day, I think we have to embrace AI. But if we're embracing AI and we are doing memorization, then it is of no benefit to us because the human mind is doing the routine task and then you
Yeah.
want AI to do what? So once you get AI, then education system might pivot. I have to leapfrog to a point where we are promoting, if you were to use the new Bloom's taxonomy, synthesis, evaluation, analysis, and you are looking at creating. And that is where AI becomes of great benefit to us. It helps you do routine tasks, but it also leaves you with time to look at creative tasks, which the human mind is created to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe in AI, but I also believe that if we don't take advantage of it to really pivot to the highest level, which is creating in the education space, then we have wasted all the resources that we use in bringing about AI in our schools.
Yeah. And I mean, before we go to our final segment, we've talked through a lot of issues. But if you were to summarize, I want you to give us a summary of the current state of our educational system. What are the problems? What are the main issues? And if you had unlimited funding to fix our educational system, what are two or three key things that you would do?
I think it's a very difficult question for me. I'm no longer the education minister. So even if you give me all the funding, I still can't change the education system. Yeah. So that's the sad part of it. But what I will say is that I hope the new government will, they have 1 year plus some months. So now they have to begin to take a look at how do they continue where we left off, so that the people of Ghana will become the ultimate beneficiaries. Education transformation is a must. We have to do it. And in order for us to do it, it means different governments, when they come to power, have to look at where others left off and really, really continue. And if we are willing to continue, then I can say the future of Ghana's education is promising. Because if you look at where Mo Ibrahim was looking at the STEM education, other things that they took a look at and say, hey, you are number 2 in Africa. We're only left to become number 1 when you are number 2. So I hope that the current government will see to it that the reforms that we introduce are continued. But when you are not in power, you don't control anything.
Unfortunately, that is the situation. Well, so there's this last segment is just a quick questions and quick answers. So I'm going to run through some questions and then you offer your answer to those questions. So my first question is the most underrated subject in Ghanaian schools.
Visual arts.
Visual arts.
vi-
Yeah.
Visual arts.
Yeah, that is
So if you're
true.
an educator like me and you look at the fact that the highest level of learning is creating, according to the new Bloom's taxonomy, according to Depth Web of Knowledge, the highest level of learning is when you are creating something. Visual artists create every day, and yet when you go to schools, they are the least respected among all students because their brain cannot memorize the way others can. We look down on them. And it's to our detriment as a nation when we look down on those who can create. So I always ask myself, when your engineering classrooms don't have visual artists, how are you innovating? That's why when I became Minister for Education, I changed something in Ghana. I decided that students who did visual arts and did home economics and other subjects in high school, which hitherto could not change their minds to become engineers even if they wanted to, should be given opportunity. So I created a pre-engineering program, and not as some universities have. I began with a grant to 2 universities, Pentecost University, UMAT, University of Mines and Technology at Takwa, and these 2 universities began pre-engineering so that students who did general arts in high school, did visual arts in high school, can go and study mathematics, physics, and chemistry for a year. And after they are certified as proficient in the sciences, then they give them a chance to move on to become engineers. And based on evaluation that has been done, those students are doing better in level 100 and 200 than those who did science. So to me, I will have talent, but how we nurture the talent, how we can use preconceived notions of what ought to be,
Yeah.
and say that if you're a visual artist, you can never be an engineer. But that visual artist can go to the United States of America, enroll in a community college, take physics and chemistry classes, advanced calculus classes, and become an engineer
Yeah.
and become one, maybe the world's famous engineers.
Yeah.
So to me, I felt strongly that children of Ghana don't have to go to America for their talent to come to the forefront. And therefore, I enabled them to do that. And it's something I'm very proud of.
Okay. I think that is a very eye opening response because, come to think of it, that is always the impression. I mean, when we were in school as science students, if you said you are visual art, we know you are not serious. If you said you are home economics, we know, oh, home econs and visual art is there. But yes, the creating is the central aspect of learning. So that is really, really true. So, if not education, what career would you have pursued?
Probably will have pursued real estate development. My bachelor's degree was in land economy. So that was my first in terms of a job, doing property valuations and real estate development and all those kind of things. So I know that obviously if I was not in education, that would have been the field that I would
Okay.
have
All right.
practiced.
So a strict teacher or an encouraging teacher?
Both.
Okay.
I'm strict to the extent that I want you to succeed, so I don't want you to play around. But I'm one of the most encouraging teachers. When I was teaching in the US, I was able to get my students so motivated to overcome fear of mathematics. One year, my high school graduating class voted for me as the funniest teacher they've ever seen. I had to find different ways of getting them to overcome the fear of mathematics, and I couldn't be this rigid, strict teacher sitting there for them to do that. So I had to create a very encouraging environment, tell them jokes, and get them to believe my stories. Like I grew up with I would talk about some artists that I grew up with, and I was simply Snoop Dogg. I used to tell them that I grew up with Snoop Dogg, and we all live in Long Beach. I researched and found out that he started life in Long Beach. So, hey, I grew up with Snoop Dogg. He was having a bad influence on me. So my parents sent me to Africa. That's why I speak with an accent now, and they believe me. And I remember when I was teaching mathematics in Los Angeles Unified School District, I'll always make the mathematics so practical. And instead of saying Mr. Jones went to store and purchased a shirt priced at 100 with a discount of 20%, I always say the Snoop Dogg. And those days, Snoop Dogg was the man.
Yes,
Those days, the
yes.
young people, yeah. So when I said Snoop, all of a sudden, math was fun because I was talking about Snoop Dogg.
Yeah, true.
So yes, I'm strict in terms of how I want children to get to, but I'm the most encouraging. I try to make sure students do well.
Okay. And one word to describe Ghana's education future. One word.
Promising.
Promising. Okay. One habit every student should develop.
Reading, being avid readers.
Okay. One country Ghana should learn from in education.
I'm torn. I would say Singapore, but the American education system has something for everyone. I think we can
Yes.
learn something from there.
Okay. Well, Honorable, thank you so much for your time. I know I've taken more than I was allocated. So I appreciate your time and your willingness to give us this information. But before you go, we would love for you to give us your last words to students, to policymakers across Ghana and Africa, and to early career professionals who are also interested in education.
To all those interested in education, I'll tell you one thing. This profession, as if you are young and you're in education, it's a fascinating profession, a profession that enables you to change the lives of many and to make their future better. When I became a member of Parliament of Osomtwe in Ghana, I decided that I wanted to have the largest concentration of engineers anywhere in Ghana or maybe in Africa. So my constituency, what I did was to raise funds to sponsor students to become engineers. And today, I've graduated 93 students as engineers within a space of 6 years. And my goal is to do about 150, 20 of them medical doctors, 130 being engineers. And these students are now working for major companies in Ghana. And it makes me happy every day that my vision has led to a change in the fortunes of the youth of my constituency. So wherever you find yourself in the education space, you have an opportunity to bring hope to the hopeless. You have opportunity to encourage, to elevate, motivate, and get people to change their fortune. In Africa, education is the way. And if we can change the education system to ensure that we have creative and critical thinkers, Africa's fortunes will change. So I encourage you to embrace education, embrace STEM education. And by the way, don't forget about the arts. It's so important that creativity is infused through music and dance and many, many other professions in the arts field. And we have to ensure that STEM does not go without the arts. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Honorable. Well, this was an episode that was dedicated to STEM education, AI evolution, and how we can best prepare the next generation of thinkers. If you're new to this was the Scholars Table with your host, Dr. Banda Khalifa. Until next time, bye bye.